Hi, everyone, and welcome or welcome back to Erasing the Stigma. Today, I am so excited to be here with Jennifer Lawrence. Jennifer Lawrence is a licensed professional counselor and a licensed professional art therapist here in New Jersey. And I am going to let Jennifer introduce herself.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me, Julia. I do provide counseling, art therapy, and play therapy to families here in New Jersey. I also do a couple of different groups that are more like art for well-being, art experiential groups. I have a mindful messes group, which is for kids and their grown-ups to have a positive experience together, practicing mindfulness techniques, art making, and emotional regulation. And then I also have art workshops for moms that I do both in person and online.
That is amazing. So, could you just explain what art therapy is and the value that art can bring to wellness and well-being?
So art therapy is a very specific counseling modality. So to be an art therapist, you have to have a master's degree in art therapy. Most of the time it's at least a 2-year program. Some of us do a 3-year program. Um, and it's really a unique approach to the counseling relationship. We can assess, diagnose, and treat using art materials and so art therapists are primarily trained in the visual arts. There's creative arts therapists who are trained in a lot of different modalities of expression, but art therapists are typically trained in visual arts. And so we can use the materials and the process of art making to support a client in achieving their mental health and mental well-being goals. We work in a variety of settings across the age span, birth to death, and it's really cool. I love
I mean,
it.
that sounds really wonderful. I feel that art therapy is a unique approach to therapy because a lot of times when we think of therapy, we typically associate it with talk therapy, which
Yeah.
can be difficult for people of all ages, but especially for children who might have a hard time expressing their emotions or saying what they are thinking or feeling. So having the medium of art to translate this is something that's unique and special. And so I want to hone in the conversation on how art therapy can be beneficial for kids with dyslexia or just specifically for people with dyslexia in general.
Yeah, for sure. And before we go on, I just want to make sure I say this. There's a lot of kind of like things people say they use art in their therapy or art therapy certifications. Those are not the same as working with a board certified or licensed professional art therapist. So if you are searching for an art therapist, make sure that they do have the license. In New Jersey, we have a license, or that they have the board certification through the American Art Therapy Association. So that's a really important thing because it's different than just using art materials um, as part of your therapy. The other misconception is that art therapists don't talk. We can totally talk. So we're trained as counselors. So we will, if that's what a person comes in and they want to work, and it's a big part of kind of understanding the art that you're working with. And so that's just something I like to throw those pieces in because it's kind of a mysterious thing. People think we're just like analyzing your art, and most art therapists are not looking at your art and analyzing it. But that's just an aside for what art therapy is. But with dyslexia, so what I really love about art therapy is that it allows a person to show up as their whole self
Mhm.
and to process information in the way that makes the most sense to them. So it doesn't matter like kind of what the entry point is. There's all and with the art materials, we can always find an entry point for you to begin to explore what's going on for yourself and then to express it and to make meaning out of it. So that's one of the things I think is really helpful, especially, whether it's dyslexia or another learning-based disability or um, neurodivergence.
Okay, and so when you're saying to explore this entry point, what does that look like, especially when you are talking to someone who might not necessarily have a background in creating art or may not feel too comfortable with it?
That makes sense. So our therapists use the materials to help you have different experiences. So if you think about it, like if something is wet, like watercolors or clay, it can get out of control really easily. And
Mm.
if you've got a kid who's dealing with any individual who's dealing with emotional dysregulation, that can be a perfect place for them to explore in a safe way on a little tiny piece of paper or on a tray what it feels like to be out of control, but also what it feels like to then gain some control or to maybe stop. So that's where we're using those materials. So we're not like trying to create a pretty picture. We're really using the materials to help us amplify what's already there, what you're already struggling with, and then to try to give you the opportunity to practice a different approach within that. If you need more control, so like maybe being out of control and having the messiness of like a messy clay or some watercolors would be too much for a person. So we can offer something that's maybe less messy, like crayons or colored pencils, and we can explore it there. And so we can kind of like play with those different materials to kind of let you have the experience that you need to kind of to move your goals forward. The way I work is pretty client directed. So I work primarily with kids in my practice, and they come in and they pick out exactly what they need to do. It's like, I say it's like magic. I don't know how they know, but they come in, and the kids who don't like to touch sticky things will go pick up that bottle of glue and they will like dump it everywhere. And again, I contain it. We're on a tray, so they're not having like an out of control experience, but then they're like, oh, my hands are sticky. And then what do I do? And sometimes we stay with like, oh, yeah, you're uncomfortable. And we
Right.
stay there and we get to feel a little uncomfortable, but we're safe, right? Like, and I keep breathing. And then their brains learn that breathing is one of the options that we can do. Or sometimes if I know that that stickiness is too much, I might say like, I've got some wet wipes there and see if they can make a choice themselves. Or sometimes I just need to direct them like, should we go wash our hands? Putting the choice back on them, but being more directive. So I can always work on any of those based on what that kid needs in that moment. So this is where the therapy part is really important. Where having a trained therapist is really important, is that I'm making decisions all at every moment of how that child is interacting with those art materials and then helping them move forward with what I know is going to be most helpful for them. Some kids don't need to stay dysregulated with the stickiness. Other kids do need to experience a little bit of like what that dysregulation feels like and know they're safe. It just depends on the kind of what their treatment goals are.
Right. And that seems like such a wonderful approach, especially for kids, because it creates a safe space, like you were saying, where they
Mhm.
can feel uncomfortable or dysregulated, but the stakes necessarily aren't too high because you're
Yeah,
working with these art materials that are known to be fun and playful and generally safe. I
true.
feel like oftentimes kids don't have the space to feel dysregulated, but also have lower stakes. My mind first thinks about when kids are in school. Oftentimes they feel very dysregulated, or they feel like they're out of control. But in a classroom, the stakes are a bit higher, especially because they have other peers around them. So being able to come to an art therapy space must be so unique. And so, how do you see children respond after coming to the space maybe for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, they almost always want to come back. So it's really empowering to be able to come into a space and make decisions. I think you just pointed out when a kid spends all day in school, they don't have a lot of autonomy or control. And so, number one, being able to come into a space where they have autonomy and control is being practiced. That feels like refreshing for a lot of kids. Um, the other thing is, I think that from the get-go, from day one, we're working with their actively working with their nervous system and allowing them to, first of all, acknowledge when things do feel uncomfortable. I think so. We're kind of trained in our culture to just like pretend like everything's okay. And that's the goal, is that okay is the ideal or the good state, and not being okay is the bad state. And in actuality, they're just all neutral. They're just all like true. Like some days I have bad days where I feel like I need a lot of support, and some days I have days when I can offer support to other people. And if you allow kids to like let that be true, it can be really intense, but at the same time, they learn that it's okay, that
Mhm.
it's okay for them to be exactly who they are, and we don't have to change anything. But we
Mhm.
have options. Like
Yes.
your only option isn't to just hide under your desk when you feel overwhelmed. There's other options, but that is an option to hide under your desk, for
Right.
example.
Right, no, and I think that that is such an important lesson, especially when you have someone with dyslexia or someone who's just struggling in school, because it creates the notion that it's okay to ask for help. And I think oftentimes in school, it's this idea of asking for help can be scary. Kids might feel like if they ask for help, then they're showing a weakness or they're behind their peers. But being able to show that it's okay basically to not be okay or not to be in this ideal state and to then ask for help and to have the scaffolding and that be a positive thing, but also rewarding as in an art therapy perspective. I'm sure kids get a lot of reward in creating the art and having fun.
Yeah.
So getting reward out of asking for help is very empowering because as you're going through the journey of dyslexia, especially as a kid, you're going to have ups and downs, and there's going to be so many times when you have to ask for help. And knowing that that's okay is the
Right.
first step into this journey and having a successful journey.
Right. Right.
Just
Yeah. And not even that you can ask for help, but that you deserve it.
exactly,
Like
yeah.
any human being at any point could need extra assistance.
Mhm.
So, I think that that's something I really want kids to know, that it's like, it's totally cool if you're a person who always needs to tell everybody you need a quieter environment,
Mhm.
or that you do not like to wear socks, like these are the things that kids come in with. Um, but I also think like, even I love that you use the word scaffolding. Um, Asking for help is a really important skill set. I also think that most kids don't know how to, and the educators, the adults, have to scaffold that experience for them. So a lot of kids come in to see me with like a 504 plan or an IEP, and they have like, can take breaks when they need them. And of course, the parents always say, but they never take a break. Most of the kids that come in, they don't, first of all, they don't want to be seen as weird. They don't want to ask they're afraid to ask for help, to ask for a break, but they also don't even know, like, when is it okay? What does that asking for help look like? And so those are all things that we can practice in the session, but I'm also giving parents tools for how to go back to their schools and advocate for those, like, not just that they get a break, but that they have a professional on site who's working with them on like what does a break look like in their specific class that year. Because teachers have preferences too. There's
Yes.
guidelines in classes, and our kids, our neurodivergent kids, they process language different. They process communication and social patterns differently. They don't know. They're very disoriented in the classroom, and they don't know what's okay and what's not okay unless you have to check out to make sure that they know.
Exactly, yes. And it's important for your child to have these skills, especially as a parent, when you can't be there in the classroom and you don't necessarily know what's going on, or if your child is getting the help that they need because you don't know if they know how to advocate for it. And so children are all different, so this is going to vary on a case by case basis. But are there any general tips that you give to parents to help them practice these tools that you teach children within your art therapy space on a daily
Yeah.
basis?
Yeah, 100%. And that's like actually a big part of what we do. The kids come in, they play, they make art. We're practicing in the moment our different options. And then I have the parents for about 10 minutes. And that's when we do the teaching piece of like, because the parents are the ones who are going to be like carrying this forward.
Right.
And what we really want to capitalize on, or we have these things in our brains called mirror neurons. And that's what I'm teaching parents about is like everything that you do is how your child learns how to be with challenging situations, because their brains are wired to learn. Our mirror neurons are talking to each other, and that's how they're learning. Oh, when I get glue all over my hands and I feel like I'm going to freak out, like my grown up isn't freaking out.
Hmm.
And so I'm working with parents constantly, like, how do you find your ground? First of all, how do you know that it's not an emergency when your kid is having a meltdown? There's safety issues, like if someone's hurting themselves, hurting, has the potential to hurt themselves, like if they're running the street, you have to take action, right? But mostly everything, even like tearing all your clothes out of the closet, it's not an emergency. It's annoying and it's overwhelming and it might be confusing, but it's not an emergency. So as grown-ups supporting these kids that are having these behaviors, how do we first find our ground so that we can then proactively, or we can respond to the behavior from a communication perspective? What is the behavior trying to communicate to me? What is my child trying to communicate to me in this moment? And how can I move with them through that experience? How can I be in control of my response so that I can teach their nervous system like there's another option
Mhm.
to moving through this confusion or frustration?
Mhm. Which makes a lot of sense. And although that is such a powerful thing to do, I feel like oftentimes you might run into a situation where a parent really wants to do that, but in the situation that they're being faced, they might be very overwhelmed and
Mhm.
they might go back to an innate response of
Yeah.
snapping at the child or
Mhm.
overreacting for a situation that doesn't call for such a reaction. So, do you have tips for parents to help them take a step back and collect themselves so then they could go forth with this
Yeah.
response?
Yeah. So if a parent is struggling with this, I always recommend that they work with their own professionals to kind of dig into like what's happening for them. Why is their stress response like so easily triggered? And it's normal. Like this can happen to any of us, and we all have our different vulnerabilities towards these states. Um, but for parents, as when we're working through this, when they're working with me, what we're really looking at is those ways to bring yourself back into the present. So, breath, movement, sensory awareness, and then I always incorporate creativity also for parents that are open to that. So, you can always access your breath no matter where you are. And it's not a matter of telling your kid to take a deep breath. You take the deep breath. If parents can start there, school professionals can start there. That's like a really big first step. And you'll know what to do. You'll know if you need to take a big breath in or if you need a long breath out. If you allow yourself to do this and just pause for that 2 seconds that it takes, that pause will help give you some space to see what's going on with your kid. And it
Mhm.
will help you know, do I need to move closer to my kid? Do I need to give them space? Do I need to use words right now to coach them through? Do I need to just be using my body to communicate safety in this moment? So, breath is an easy one. Finding your feet on the ground, feeling the ground, or I find even more so leaning against a wall. Like
Mhm.
sometimes finding your feet on the ground is a little too, takes you out of the moment. Leaning against a wall, it's easier to stay connected to your kid. So you're getting that proprioceptive input, you're getting that input to your nervous system that I'm not running away, I'm here and I'm okay. And that my kid's okay. You know, always, this is always with the caveat that that the kid is inherently okay. It's just, they're having a moment, right? Um, Sensory awareness, that's, could be the wall, feeling the wall. It could be um, running water over your hands. It could be looking at something that you have in your space that helps remind you, like, okay, I know this is the commitment I made. We with art, we make a lot of little cards with moms. I have them make little cards that they can put up around their house that are the color that helps remind them, like, okay, I told myself I was going to do this. Um, and then, I think journaling and, exploring creativity on your own is a great way to kind of get information, but that's in a different moment in time, maybe going back and like kind of, helping yourself understand the experience and so that you can stay engaged. Um, but the other big thing for parents to know is that like there's no perfection in this.
Mhm.
There's moments when we respond in a way where we're like, oh, that felt like I was connected. It was good. And there's other moments, I'm a parent myself, um, to a neurodivergent kid who like loves to push my buttons, who I allow to push my buttons. Um, where we just don't respond in the way that like we're human beings. We're not going to respond in a perfect way every time, and we're not harming our kid. All we're doing is we're staying in relationship with them, and relationships are going to have a lot of miscommunication opportunities, especially if your child communicates in a way that's different from your communication style, or if you're both working on with different operating systems that communicate different. Like the most important thing is that when the dust has settled, is that you come back and you do a repair or a connecting moment. So you're like, even though it was really hard in that moment, we still are committed to staying in a relationship with each other.
Mhm. No, I
So,
think that is such an amazing reminder for parents to have that there are going to be moments where it's not going to be this ideal circumstance, and that's okay. And even if you have one moment that is not ideal, it doesn't inhibit you from having another moment that can't be ideal in some sense of the definition. And I also really loved the earlier point that you touched on for parents to first look inwards into how they're reacting, whether that is engaging with the therapist themselves or doing all these different techniques that you were talking about. Oftentimes, for some parents, it might feel counterintuitive to look inward before helping their child. Their innate response might be to go and to respond to the child rather than taking that step back. And when you were describing that, I kept thinking about a metaphor for this can almost be like when you're in the airplane and you see the safety manual and it says for the parent to put on the oxygen mask first before helping the kid. Because if you don't put your oxygen on mask on first, then you can't necessarily help your child if you are in such a state of distress. And so I think that that is also important for parents to remember that even though this might feel a little uncomfortable or counterintuitive at first, ultimately you are doing what's best for your child by helping yourself and looking inward.
yeah. And what you're doing is, again, you're allowing your kids' mirror neurons to see one option for managing uncomfortable feelings. Because I
Mhm.
can tell you, when my kid yells at me, I feel very uncomfortable. And so I have an option in those moments to allow that discomfort. And this isn't about being calm. I can be uncomfortable and still stay connected to my kid. Or I can be reactive and go into my own protection
Mhm.
of like, fighting back or shutting down or whatever my protection style is for that day. So, but I'm not always calm, but we can stay connected.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that that is such a wonderful reminder. And then going to the point about perfection, this process, especially for parents, is not one where it's full of perfection. I really wanted to touch on that in general for parents and students because I feel like art is such a wonderful medium because there's no necessarily like no form of perfection in art. You have that famous saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so, how does your work in art therapy challenge notions that children might have, or even the work that you do with parents might have about perfection?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big one. And first of all, it seems like most kids get that we're not there to make something pretty. So, or that, but if they do have that impulse where it's only right if it's the way that I want it to be, then that's what we're working on. Again, this is why it's really important that you're working with a therapist, an art therapist with this, because there's specific ways that we're going to work with that drive for perfection. And oftentimes it has to do with like that's where I feel the safest, when I feel most in control. And so then we're working the edges of like what happens when you're not in control of things. So then I might offer them a material that's a little bit harder to control. Like we mentioned the watercolors. It's very hard to control those, unless you've had a lot of instruction. And I don't provide instruction on how to use materials. Every once in a while, kids, if there's something they're trying to accomplish technically and it's in line with their treatment goals. But for the most part, we allow the mistakes to happen and then we get to be in the moment with a mistake and figure out what we're going to do
Mm.
with that experience. And for some kids, this is the core of what they're working on. And we have lots and lots and lots of mistakes and that happen. When I work with adults, um, It's a lot of offering them things that are very open-ended that aren't going to have a product that necessarily, so you're not trying to do a cookie cutter type, like here's our project for today. Um, but you also provide high success materials. So again, we come back to the knowledge of materials. So like things like stickers, stamps, paints that are very easy to control. Like there's these tempera paint sticks that are very easy to control, but still give you the satisfaction of that fluidness of paint. And so when you're working with those materials, you're gonna in you're going to create something that has an aesthetic quality to it. And then I find that when people create just something from that safe space, they're in relationship with it, and it's something that becomes inherently satisfying to them. And it doesn't matter if it's satisfying to other people. They have an aesthetic experience of interacting with those materials and composing something when I provide them with materials that are a good match for their, technical level. Um, and then they're like so proud of it. It's like, they were like, it's like their baby. You want
Right.
to just take it home and keep appreciating it,
Mhm.
but we
Yes.
remove the pressure.
Yes, no, which is so important that you take a step back from this like right way or wrong way, hypothetically, and you're doing it their way and how they want to do it. And especially for a school age child, that is super important because in school, there is more so of a black and white nature of what is right and what is wrong. And children can easily digest this black and white nature, but
Mhm.
there is a gray area where okay, I might have not done the right thing. I might have made a mistake, but I'm learning for something. So there's one part of it that might be wrong, there's another part of it that might be right. And oftentimes, for kids who are neurodivergent, for kids who have dyslexia, you're working more so in this gray area than you are in this black and white area. And for kids and their brains and processing that can be really hard. So, to have a space where they're creating art and they're also operating in this gray area and they can form a very strong and positive relationship for this in this area, I can only imagine translates very positively to their school lives and understanding that even though I might have not gotten a question right, I learned from it, and that's what's important.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, Julia, because it's not what we teach kids in school. I was an educator for a long time before I was a therapist. And we really do value in school, we place a priority on like getting the right answer. And but our kids with dyslexia, the gift of dyslexia is that you see things differently. You have a perceptual difference. So your gift is that you actually can see things different. And sometimes they're really good at calling adults out on things that are like kind of unnecessary, like when they're stuck on we want the right answer when there could be lots of different answers, right? And so some of our kids are really good at like, but it gets them in trouble too. So like we're always working with all those different things of like, how do you show up authentically yourself? And a big thing that I work on with kids is trusting that when you feel confused when you have an interaction with someone like a teacher or a peer, when you have that interaction, can you get use that as an opportunity to get curious versus saying, what did I do wrong?
Right. Yes, no,
That's a lot of what our kids come in with is I did something wrong. And they actually didn't. It may just be a perceptual or communication difference that could be clarified.
that. Yes, no, I really appreciate that sentiment to be curious about it rather than immediately judging something as right and wrong. Because also, if you're judging something as right and wrong, you kind of stop the conversation there. It's I was wrong and that's it. But when you're curious, you're going to explore and learn new things about it. So, especially for a child, that is extremely important. And so, the final question that I want to ask you is you have provided such amazing information about art therapy and made such a wonderful case of why art therapy is so beneficial. So, if you're talking to a parent with a child who has dyslexia, how would you help this parent evaluate if art therapy is the right step for their child, especially considering the fact that a parent might have a financial constraint and have to figure out where they want to allocate their finances?
Yeah. So I think therapy is a really good fit when there's something that where your kid feels stuck and it's starting to affect their daily functioning and it's affecting the family life, that's when it's a good time to kind of get another person in to help shift that up a little bit to figure out, is there also a concurrent mood disorder that's going on along with their dyslexia? Is it a self-esteem piece that we can work on? Um, is it kind of a reorienting and helping the adults understand their child's unique perceptual differences and communication styles, and kind of creating an environment for them at home that helps to accommodate those needs, and then and by extension school. So I think that when it starts to affect daily functioning, that's when it's a really great time to come into therapy. In terms of like accessibility, uh, a lot of times our therapists do groups. So those are a really good entry point. And some of those are not therapeutic groups. Sometimes they're like more of an art for well-being or an art experiential. I know my groups outside of my practice they're not therapy groups, they're experiential groups working on specific training, specific skill sets through the art making process. So groups are oftentimes a much lower cost option, and kids like them. You know, they like being with other kids who like think the way that they think. A lot of people put stuff online, so you can find a ton of free resources. I have a website. There's a ton of art therapists that put activities and things online, and then there's some really great books are that are written by art therapists that have some strategies and things that you can use so you can use arts at home and explore things in those ways.
Yes, no, those are such wonderful options. A group option also brings in the idea of socialization with other kids.
Mhm.
On the online option, I know for Color and Confidence, we work with an art therapist to look over our projects, and there's so many resources
Mhm.
online, which is so great for being in this like technological era that you can find that, but also working in person with an art therapist, as we have seen through this conversation can make such a huge difference. So with that, parents can see that there are so many options and
Yeah.
also
I thought of one more option too. A lot of times when therapists are gaining their license,
yes.
so most I don't know every state's process, but most states you have to do about 2,000 hours of supervised work, and a lot of group practices will offer those sessions with the pre-licensed therapist at a much reduced cost. So if you look for so as you're looking for therapists, if you look for a practice that has, you know, multiple therapists at it, and our therapists are all over the place too in those practices. So it may not be an art therapy practice, but it might be a counseling practice. You can oftentimes find lower cost sessions through that way too.
That is
Yeah.
amazing. I did not know that. And so that is really wonderful for parents to keep in mind. So, for everyone who's watching, thank you so much. And I will put all of your information in the bio and the video description so parents can look more into what you offer and all of your amazing resources. And so, thank you so much for speaking with us and providing us so much wonderful information.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye bye.